yesterday that were described as lightning bolts of truth.
Really?
I'm not exactly sure what those comments were. Tell us about that.
Well, we were indicating to the court that international law is applicable in Montgomery County, and that is a clear finding both of the Nuremberg tribunal, and those principles were enunciated as the Nuremberg principles in a resolution that was introduced by the United States before the United Nations and adopted, establishing that the three specific categories of crime: crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against the peace. And that if anyone becomes aware that any of these three crimes are being perpetrated, they have an international, they have a duty to do what they can to prevent the commission of such crimes. It includes not only the crimes themselves, but preparation or conspiracy or planning that would lead to the crimes, and they're identified as extermination, destruction of whole populations, bombing of cities involving civilian rather than military targets, and of course that's exactly what nuclear weapons are about. So we were trying to make clear that while we were going to raise some constitutional issues and rights to a fair trial for ourselves, these constitutional questions were fairly minor, and you almost feel foolish raising them in comparison with the international crimes that are being perpetrated out at General Electric, and which is the real focus of this trial.
What would you perceive as being your major motivation for taking the action that you did take at General Electric?
Well, it was a human motivation. We're aware of where we are in human history. Albert Schweitzer says that it's now clear to everyone that the suicide of civilization is underway. You could cite scientists, doctors, military people, government reports, treaties that all acknowledge that we're in a crisis. We're possibly in the final chapter of human history. We call it living in an end time. And our purpose was to say that these weapons are not in our name, and we resist and expose the crimes that are being undertaken. General Electric, as you know, is central in the development of the first strike technology, nuclear weapons technology, which specifically is designed to attack an enemy missile silo, and that means when the silo is filled, that means attacking before the Soviet Union would attack, and that's the first strike.
You don't see these as possibly a deterrent in any way?
No, they're not. There really has never been any policy of deterrence. The United States used its first nuclear arsenal at Hiroshima and Nagasaki to assert its power in the world, particularly to intimidate the Soviet Union. It has threatened to use nuclear weapons again and again, which is, the threat is completely out of keeping with, the threat to use nuclear weapons is completely out of keeping with the concept of deterrence. Deterrence is a sales slogan. It's been used to sell nuclear weapons to which there's no defense to the American people.
The American government has been conning the American people.
Well, there's no dispute that it's been, first of all, doing everything it's doing in secret from the Manhattan Project on. So there's been no free disclosure from the beginning. Then, when secrecy is not sufficient, yes, there's been deception.
Do you feel that the action that you and the other defendants took is going to bring some of these aspects out to the public and reveal some of the secret activities that are going?
Yes, indeed. One of the General Electric engineers came out while we were vigiling there prior to this action. There's been a peace witness there for 2 years, and we held a banner that said, one said, "Let these shameful weapons be banned," quoting from Paul VI, and the other said, "We decry Mark 12A, first strike, nuclear death." He said, "These are beautiful banners." He said, "A lot of the work are going to think about what you're saying. But tell me, why do you say first strike?" And he said, I only build weapons for deterrence." And my answer was one word: accuracy, which he thought about, and as an engineer and as a designer, he understood perfectly. And he said, "Oh, yes, I understand, and thank you for being here." Well, when a person that's working there doesn't even know, what they're doing, it shows you the level of asleepness and the need for awakening. And that's just one incident, but I think we've found a tremendous amount of light has been brought to bear on what the nuclear weapons policy is of this country.
If you could give a message to the American people, or to the people of the world, in fact, what would that message be?
Well, that we're all human, and we make choices about our jobs and about our government, and that these acts of the United States government in building an arsenal of nuclear weapons that now numbers some 30,000 nuclear weapons and developing first strike technology is our responsibility, and we are all responsible. And as such, we are free to choose weapons that choose actions that express that responsibility. So I think each person has to do that in their own way. They have to make their own decisions. For some people, it will be leaving their jobs, as friends we have left the Pentagon or left General Electric, or Bob Aldrich, who's here, left Lockheed after 16 years as a missile engineer systems designer, when he too recognized that first strike was what the Pentagon was interested in. But people can make those choices. And I think that's our message, and that's our witness, that each of us are free, we have a choice. The situation is very, very grave, but who knows what potential there is for millions of people awakening, encouraging one another, supporting one another in small communities, taking actions, appealing to conscience. Nuclear weapons are the greatest evil yet conceived by human minds, and yet we all have conscience and can turn from that.
You appear to be willing, though, to pay a very heavy price for the exercise of your conscience.
Well, actually, the price of some term of imprisonment is not relatively a heavy price, but certainly you do have to be prepared to take some risks and pay some price. It may mean just giving up one's accustomed standard of living or way of life. There's some cost, but there have to be some cost to turning around.
Do you have any real hope about the future of mankind?
We all have hope. Hope is something like love. You believe in love, even in a situation which may seem quite loveless. You believe in hope, and you express hope in your own life, even in a situation like our own, where many of the experts are predicting the final cataclysm within 5 years, or certainly before the end of this century. It seems truly hopeless, humanly speaking, but we certainly do have hope.
Do you share that cataclysmic vision in terms of 5 years, 10 years, and there's some sense that we're actually a hair away?
We are a hair away. The Titan II missile that blew up in Damascus, Arkansas, shows us that. And that was a 9-megaton warhead. That's about 750 Hiroshimas that blew up, blowing a crater 250 feet across. And that was just the conventional TNT that was supposed to trigger a thermonuclear reaction. And then the whole missile burned in 10,000 gallons of fuel. That level of accident shows you how close we are. And there have been accidents like that again and again and again. I'm sure that the United States has been nuclear bombed by the United States Air Force. It's dropped 24 megaton bombs in several places: South Carolina, Georgia, off the Atlantic coast. and a number of these were never recovered. You familiar with that? 24 megatons, that's about 2,000 Hiroshimas. One was dropped off Tybee Island.
Were these drops intentional or unintentional?
Unintentional. These are what they call broken arrows, accidents. The one that dropped on Greensboro, North Carolina in 1961, 5 of the 6 safety triggers were released. That we were that close to releasing a 24 megaton bomb, which Daniel Ellsberg said would have exceeded many-fold all the explosive power of all the wars in humankind preceding that explosion. So the risk from accidents, from miscalculation, or from international tensions, a showdown over some incident somewhere, is very likely to lead us to the final disaster.
Well, you said previously that each individual has to take on some kind of responsibility, but could you be more specific, and is there anything that the American people or people everywhere could consider in terms of practically changing their lives so that we could avoid or head off such a disaster?
Well, I think that idea of changing our lives is central to it. That we have to, particularly as Americans, look at what it means to have this murderous intent in our heart, to be willing to slaughter hundreds of millions of defenseless people in the name of anything, in the name of democracy, in the name of capitalism, in the name of freedom. How can you bring all life to an end in the name of freedom? We have to look at ourselves. It's a deep inner examination. We have to look at what it means to be the world's greatest exporter of weapons. We sell more weapons than all the rest of the countries combined. And often to these terribly oppressive and dictatorial regimes like the Shah of Iran or Somoza in Nicaragua or the junta in El Salvador. Our lives have to be examined, and I think in the case of the nuclear threat, it's so clear. It's so clear. It's a question drawn as large as it can. If we use these weapons, we'll be killing ourselves. The karma will be instantaneous. It's a murder-suicide pact. You commit murder and then commit suicide. And we have to realize how awful it is, and that our human calling is something quite different.
Why is it that we seem to be driven towards such a pact of murder and suicide?
Of course, a great deal of it is simply because of the darkness, simply because so much of this is done in secrecy. Because millions of Americans are taking an oath of secrecy when they take their job. Employees at General Electric cannot talk to their wife or husband about what they do. They can't talk to their priest or minister. They can't talk to their lawyer or their doctor or their children. And millions of Americans are sworn to that kind of secrecy, whether they work in the Pentagon or in the military or in the several thousand corporations that have Pentagon contracts. And of course there are no secrets. There are no real secrets. But this is a bind on their conscience that's imposed so that they not talk about what they're doing. And in that kind of secrecy, then these terrible works of murder can be done.
Isn't that kind of secrecy unconstitutional in terms of human rights?
Oh, it is. Certainly is. People feel that we do have the freedom, and yet they overlook all the requirements of the national security mentality and the national security state when they speak about that freedom. Nuclear weapons, for example, have never been discussed in Congress, never been voted on. There's never been any free discussion. This technology has just overtaken humankind and been multiplied and expanded from the Manhattan Project on. And most people are only dimly aware of the specifics, for example, of first strike policy, of what the Mark 12A is, of what's going on out at the Reentry Systems Division in King of Prussia, right in their backyard.
Do you have any hope in the outcome of this trial, if I may say so?
Well, we always hold hope to the judge, to the jury, as people with conscience. For the most part, though, a great evil is embodied in the law. It's not an exception to the law. Just as the apartheid is embodied in the law of Africa, nuclear weapons are embodied in the law in this country. And whatever GE does, whatever the Pentagon does, is kind of blindly endorsed by the courts ordinarily. And what our hope and what we've prepared for in good faith is for a fair and open hearing.
Could you explain, please, what you mean when you say that nuclear weapons are embodied in the law?
Well, I mean that, for example, our going into General Electric, where international crimes are being perpetrated, crimes against humanity are being perpetrated, has led to our being arrested and imprisoned for close to 5 months across the street. The law does not look at what General Electric does. It looks at our entry there and protects the status quo and protects the evil of nuclear weapons.
Has your proposed defense of international law ever been successfully used in a civil disobedience trial such as yours?
The defense of necessity has been used at nuclear power plant occupation trials. The Trojan out in Oregon, Zion, Illinois nuclear power plant, the Long Island Shoreham nuclear power plant, and of course the law that we're relying on is established, clearly established law. I don't know of any case in a nuclear weapons protest that it's been where a full and fair hearing has been given to the defendants.
Does the judge here show any disposition for accepting the defense?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. We're not quite sure. He's done a number of things that prevented a fair trial thus far. He's keeping the public out right now from the jury selection process. He's keeping the filming crew out. He's keeping Molly Rush's 2 children out. He's conducting a very limited and coercive jury selection process. But we're just beginning the trial, and possibly something will open up. Okay, thank you very much. All right.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Okay, pause. Okay.
What do you say, Bob? You want to meet this? Hey, here's some stalwarts.
How come we have commitment? We have no parents.
Oh, no questioning your commitment.
How do you like this? We're just, there's 2 ways to do things, at least.
All right.
So I take a breath. Stand up. I don't know how long Alex has been here, but I've only been here about a half hour. Most people gone to where house?
Not really. To the beach. Yeah.
Beach.
I'll be back. arguments.